Well, a warm welcome and good evening. I'm Catherine Barnett, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this event on behalf of Chillicothe Public Library. Today's webinar, Illinois Women in Science, is part of a series of programs and discussions inspired by our NEA Big Read book, Lab Girl, a memoir by Hope Jahren. Free copies of the book are available at Chillicothe Public Library, and information about related events is at chillicothepubliclibrary.org. NEA Big Read is a program of the National Endowment for the Arts in partnership with Arts Midwest. All right, well, in chapter 5 of Lab Girl, Hope Jahren writes, researchers generally love their calling to excess and delight in nothing better than teaching others to love it also, end quote. This enthusiasm seems to be alive and well at the National Center for Agricultural Utilization Research in Peoria. When the call went out for panelists for this talk, we ended up with 10 scientists eager to share their own experiences, along with the stories of other women who worked at the Ag Lab in the past. I want to extend a warm welcome to all our panelists. Thank you for taking time to be here tonight. And it's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Martha Vaughan. Dr. Vaughan is a research leader of the USDA ARS Mycotoxin Prevention and Applied Microbiology Research at the NCAUR in Peoria. She is a molecular plant biologist who investigates the effects of abiotic stress on crop fungal pathogen interactions in a manner that influences downstream mycotoxin production and grain contamination. Her goal is to identify sustainable and climate resilient strategies to eliminate mycotoxin contamination in grain and enhance food safety. Dr. Vaughan, welcome.
Thank you so much, Catherine, for inviting us. And it is our pleasure to be here and to support our local community and local libraries. And thank you all for joining us. It is very nice that we had such enthusiasm from the USDA to be here. As part of the USDA Department of Agriculture, Agricultural Research Services, it is our mission to deliver scientific solutions to agricultural problems. And let me go ahead and share my screen here real quick. And at the National Center for Agricultural Utilization Research, or NCAUR, also more affectionately known as the Ag Lab here in Peoria, we've made many different discoveries and products that have come out over the years. And historically, though, it's probably mostly known for the mass production of penicillin and the production of dextrins, which is a substitute for blood plasma. And these successes were not just accomplishments of men by themselves, but they were accomplishments that were accompanied by women, and the inclusion of women in the USDA has been historically resident. So with that, just here to show the penicillin team, it was really very much a team effort that made this happen for that mass production of penicillin. And Dorothy Fennell, the one woman there amongst that group, was the microbiologist who isolated the larger strain of penicillium that produced more of the penicillin that was needed. And in addition to Dorothy Fennell, Dr. Eileen Jeans, she was directly responsible for discovering the dextrins. And she was one of the first women in the ARS Hall of Fame. And you know, these women have really made a difference, and many of them throughout history at NCAUR and within the USDA, we just continue to make a difference and find solutions for important agricultural problems. In the book, the Lab Girl, you know, as we read through it, we followed the life of Hope Jahren. And throughout her career, from postdoc to early career scientist to then more senior scientist, as well as her close relationship that she had with her technical support scientist, Bill. And today with us amongst this panel that we have of women that you're going to get to speak with, we have a variety of those same different levels that we saw and followed Hope Jahren through. from early career scientists, postdocs, and as well as technical support scientists. So it is my pleasure to introduce some of them, and they will speak individually about themselves. Susan?
Hi. Hi, I'm Susan McCormick. I'm a research chemist, and I've mostly worked on a plant disease called Fusarium head blight that affects cereal crops. And it's a fungal disease, and the fungus makes mycotoxins, which we also have studied. And the focus has been on identifying how they're made, where they're made, when they're made, and the steps that are that the fungus uses to make the toxins, and then trying to figure out how to protect the plants from the toxins. And part of that was figuring out how the fungus protects itself from this poison that it's putting out. So the overall research goal of the work has been to make plants, cereal crops that are resistant to the fungus, so mycotoxins are kept out of the food supply.
I'll just go ahead and introduce myself. I think that'll make it easier. So my name is Brianna Whitaker. I'm a research microbiologist and ecologist working at NCAUR for less than a year. And I'm interested also in how a disease-causing and toxin-producing fungus interacts with other microbes, as well as the crop host in their environment. So things like wheat, which we use to make bread, and barley, which is used to make malted milkshakes and beer. The big questions that I like to think about include what factors out in nature, be it weather, soil, or other crops surrounding the crops that we pay attention to, allow for this disease-causing fungus and toxin-producing fungus to be so prevalent and or to produce more toxin. How do the other microbes inside of the crop either help the crop to defend itself against the pathogen, or actually decrease the crop's ability to fend off the pathogen? So these are the questions that I like to think about.
My name is Jill Moser. My background is in food science and specifically food chemistry. And I've been a research chemist at NCAUR for about 16 years now. So most of my research over the years at NCAUR has been focused around vegetable oils. So the research we do supports the oilseed growers and the vegetable oil industry for commodity oils, US commodity oils such as soybean oil, canola oil, corn oil, sunflower and safflower, as well as some of the specialty oils like olive oil or avocado oil and even fish oils. And we also characterize new oils from underutilized plants or specialty crops. I'm especially interested in oil composition and some of the special bioactive components in oils. So these can be things like vitamin E or carotenoids or different kinds of antioxidants, and how these components can interact, how they can impact the healthfulness of the oils and the foods that these oils go into, and also how they impact the shelf life, not only of the oils themselves, but of the food products that contain oils as ingredients. So included in this is studying natural antioxidants from plants to understand how they can be used to increase food shelf life and preserve the nutritional qualities and healthfulness of foods and oils. And we're also doing an interesting research project where we're structuring healthy vegetable oils into more like a fat, we call them faux fats. And this is to replace things like hydrogenated oils or saturated fat containing oils like palm oil, so that we can improve the nutrition of processed food products that contain these types of ingredients. Thanks.
So my name's Kristen Duffield. I'm a research entomologist postdoc, so I study insects, and I work in the crop bioprotection unit. And I've been in NCAUR since October 2019. I was originally hired to work on improving growth of fungus used to kill agricultural insect pests, such as caterpillars. But I'm also really interested in developing and improving insect agriculture. So farming insects as a research crop to be a resource crop to be used for things like livestock and pet food, protein, fertilizer, chitin, and so on. So I do this by conducting research on diseases like viruses of farmed insects, as well as exploring how we can make these farming practices more sustainable by incorporating agricultural waste and byproducts into the food that these insects are fed. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Ellie. I'm a biological sciences laboratory technician, and I've worked at NCAUR for a little less than 2 years. So I study the interaction between the fungus Fusarium and wheat from a genetics perspective. We're hoping to learn more about how the fungus causes disease in wheat so that we can knock out the weapons that it uses against the plants. And outside of the lab, I also enjoy working with stakeholders and on outreach and diversity projects, which give a lot of meaning and purpose to my work.
Hi there, I'm Kylie Hampton. I'm also a biological sciences lab technician working under Dr. Jose Luis Ramirez. I've been a part of Dr. Ramirez's lab at the USDA for a little over a year now. Our lab works on many different projects, but our work primarily focuses on the use of insect pathogens to reduce mosquito populations. Our main goal is to use these microbe-based biopesticide approaches to control populations of mosquitoes that are responsible for causing various diseases and death in humans. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Kim Ascherl, and I have taken a little bit of a different path to get to where I am. I currently work as the executive assistant to the center director here at NCAUR. I started my career in education, so I taught high school chemistry and physics, and realized that I missed the science part. And so I moved into a little bit more production chemistry and got involved with some ag research. Then I moved to the ag lab here in Peoria about 14 years ago, almost 15 years, and started doing research in the bio-oils area. My area of research was called atomic spectroscopy, which basically meant I got to light things on fire and look at the pretty colors. It's kind of how fireworks work. So the different colors are given off by different elements. And so I would run these elements through a plasma and determine what elements are there and how much of it is actually there. So I had the opportunity to work with a lot of different groups, which was really kind of cool because I got to find out a lot of different things going on in the lab. One of the coolest projects I worked on was looking at remediation or pulling out heavy metals out of water. So I was looking at what happened when we added some doped oil to contaminated water. What was it doing to the concentrations? And it was a lot of fun and ended up in a couple patents. So that's my story.
Hi, my name is Erica Goett. I'm also a biological sciences lab technician. I work with insects in the crop bioprotection unit with Kylie and Kristen. I work with an entomologist, Dr. Robert Bailey. So my job really has two parts. One part of my job is to raise insect pests. So I raise cabbage loopers and black cutworms currently, although I've raised other insects in the past. So I'm raising the insects that I then later in the day spend my days trying to figure out how to kill. So we have these insect pests and we're trying to find ways to control these insect pests without using classic chemical insecticides. So we're trying to find safer alternatives to the current pesticides used. And we look at the insects' diseases, the bacteria, funguses, viruses that are unique disease causing agents for insects. So these are diseases that only cause disease in insects, not other plants or animals. And we try to use these diseases to create products that can be used like chemical insecticides to control the insect pests.
Well, I'll go ahead and introduce Jessica as well, since this.
Can you hear me?
Oh, we can hear you. Perfect.
Oh,
we can
yay.
Yes. Okay. Go ahead, Jessica.
So I am a postdoctoral research associate. I've been at NCAUR for a little over 2 years now. My field of research is mainly molecular biology. I work a lot with DNA, RNA proteins and things like that. And I do specialize in the field of fungal genetics, which means I work more with fungi and different genes in their genome to find out kind of what they do. My research is mainly focused on studying different genes in agriculturally and medically important fungal pathogens that regulate specific biological processes related to things like development, pathogenesis, and secondary metabolism. The hopes is that we'll eventually discover some novel genetic targets to be able to develop strategies around that will aim to reduce the detrimental effects caused by fungi, in addition to enhancing some beneficial effects that some fungal species have. So my current research is actually working with Dr. Darren Brown. I'm in his lab. And I'm working on studying a meiotic drive element known as spore killer in Fusarium verticilloides. And we hope to eventually attempt to understand it and also harness it to try to develop a synthetic drive system that will be focused on reducing fumonisin contamination of corn. There we go.
So I'm sure that, that quite a few of you out there, depending on some of these things that I'm hearing also from other people, I don't know as much about. So don't feel uncomfortable about it. We are all have unique little niches that we're very interested in. So if we sound very excited about it, you don't know what we're talking about. It's part of it, of the work that we're doing. So now what we're going to do is just ask a couple of questions first that we have ready that I have prepared for the panelists. And the first one is for Hope Jahren in Lab Girl. It was the example of her father's profession and her love for plants that led her to pursue a career in science. Why did you choose a career in science?
I haven't always started out wanting to do scientific research, actually. So when I was younger, I wasn't like Hope, who actually had a parent that was involved in science. But despite that, I actually always found myself drawn to scientific research like biology and other things in science in general. I've always loved science. And due to my love of actually helping people, I was initially very drawn to medicine and I wanted to be a physician. One area of medicine that I was thinking of specializing in when I got to medical school was actually infectious diseases, because I've actually always been fascinated by how an infectious little microbe you can't even see can get inside of a human body or a plant or anything and just cause disease, which has always fascinated me. So during my undergraduate years, and I was from NIU, I got involved in a lab that worked with fungi actually, and I stayed in that lab for a good 7 or 8 years, I think. I never left. So I intended to go for like a year or two, and I just loved it so much that I never left. I really fell in love with fungal genetics and that level of research. So I wanted to continue doing that for the rest of my career. I mean, being in that lab really changed my life and my outlook on science and research in general. So I remember a lot of experiments I did, but like Hope, I remember probably the first experiment that I did that I actually saw like something really cool come out of it that just absolutely amazed me. It just like drew me into science, and I never wanted to leave. I still don't want to leave. So I continued to work in that, and I finished my PhD and decided to go to a postdoctoral research position. I decided the USDA because during my graduate work, I worked a lot with an agricultural pathogen known as Aspergillus flavus and aflatoxin related research. And I wanted to continue working with agriculturally important fungal species to try to develop strategies to help make food and feed safer for humans and animals and reduce that mycotoxic contamination that's commonly seen in food. That's me.
My parents weren't scientists either, but I do have an older sister that's a plant geneticist, and she kind of greased the wheels for me all along. But anyway, when we were kids, my mother bought book series for us, and one of them was Famous Men. It was an orange bound book series of like 20 books, and so there was Lincoln and Washington and baseball players like Lou Gehrig and Babe Ruth. I learned all about them, but 2 of them were agricultural scientists. That was Luther Burbank and George Washington Carver. And so those were the ones that really stuck out to me. And George Washington Carver had found all these uses for peanuts. And I learned the term chemurgy, which is finding industrial or chemical uses for with raw products. And so somehow in my head, I was very anti-smoking, and I thought, well, I'll go work for the USDA and figure out a way of finding new products for tobacco. So when people stop smoking, because of course they're going to stop smoking, then the farmers will still have a way of selling their crop, like not replacing tobacco, but anyway. So that's how I got interested in agricultural research, I think. I had a brief stint working in a glass factory before school, but when I went to college, I studied plant biology and chemistry and biochemistry. And the last year I was in school, I learned about plant taxonomy and chemotaxonomy, which is using the chemistry that the plants make to figure out what's related to what. It's also called natural products chemistry. So you're, instead of synthesizing chemicals, you are looking at what the plants or fungi or insects are making on their own. And so I went and joined a lab in Texas that specialized in plant taxonomy, plant chemotaxonomy, and started working on passion flowers and passion flower vines in Mexico and Central America. And one thing that was in the Lab Girl book that I really identified with was the road trips they took, because I had some great road trips in Mexico and Central America and Southwest US, because we'd go around and collect the plants that the lab group had worked on. And I really identified with their trip to Ireland because I had brought back passion flower vines, and the border USDA inspector was chunking the fruit down the garbage disposal and not letting me come in with them. So that was a sad day. Anyway, so I learned how to figure out what the chemicals that the plants made. And passion flowers are interesting because they've co-evolved with a group of butterflies that can handle the cyanide producing compounds that the plants make. So the heliconius butterflies can eat the leaf material without a problem. And so I was interested in that. Anyway, it's always been fun to solve the puzzle of figuring out what the chemicals are and then using that knowledge to figure out other puzzles about how things have co-evolved or how they become infectious or other things like that. At the USDA, so I switched from working mostly on plants to working mostly on fungi and the chemicals that they make, toxic and non-toxic. And one thing I worked on at the USDA when I first joined was on the volatiles that are produced by the fungi and the plants. I was working on cotton and aspergillus at the time, and how the aspergillus sent out sort of volatile signals when they were infecting the cotton plants. I think that's it.
So throughout the book of Lab Girl, there's this underlying theme that is the relationship between the scientist Hope and her technical support scientist Bill. Some aspects of that were quite funny while reading the book as well. And one of the challenges that Hope struggled with was to maintain funding so that she could keep her support staff. What are some of the challenges that have bright spots that you've had with people you've worked with as a supervisor or being supervised capacity or mentor?
Yes, so I first read this book in college, and that relationship, that story really deeply impacted what technician jobs I applied to, especially because I related to Hope's struggles with mental health. So I knew for me that having long-term stability in my job was important to me. And so I really looked to apply to the USDA because it offers a little bit more stability than some other places. And so although I started out in a temporary position, I was fortunate enough to be hired on permanently. And I feel like this has allowed my relationship with my supervisor to grow in really wonderful ways. We both chose to work together permanently for the foreseeable future, which gave me a sense of camaraderie and friendship, since I felt like we both were saying, yes, I enjoy working with you and I want to continue doing so for many years to come. So for me, my technician supervisor relationship has developed out of stability instead of hardship, like what Hope and Bill went through.
Hi, so I'm quite new to the USDA, having only worked here for less than a year, so I can't yet really comment much on the capacity of being a supervisor for a long-term technician like Ellie. However, before I came to Illinois, I actually lived first in Indiana and then in North Carolina, working in a university setting doing research. And while I was there, I got to work a lot with undergraduates, so college students. And for me, that was a really passionate, that's something I'm really passionate about, is working and mentoring students for the next generation. And the way I like to think about that relationship is the fact that every student or every person that I've ever worked with brings something unique to the table. They have their own skill sets, they have their own weaknesses, they have their own ideas about what they like the science to sort of bring to the world. And for me, it's always been really important to sort of take that into consideration for different students. So for example, in terms of thinking about how I would mentor students, sometimes I would have students come in who really, like, I only needed to tell them once and they were able to go off and do it, maybe because they'd had previous experience already working in a lab. Whereas other students come in and it's not necessarily a reflection on them, but they needed a little bit more itemized, detailed list to be able to get the work done. And sort of being able to adapt to the different needs of different students was really important. And also thinking sort of like more broadly, like different students, I had some students who were international, and they definitely approached the research in a different way. I found that they wanted to know what the purpose of the research was. They wanted to be able to connect it to medicine or veterinary science or agriculture. And so for me, it was sort of like being able to tweak how I talked about my research so that we could pull everybody to the table and sort of make them passionate about what we're all doing together. And I've always felt this great sense of responsibility when it comes to mentoring, because you can maybe think of it like teaching as well. When you have a teacher, they take all these different students underneath their wings and they're trying to help them grow. And it really sort of, it makes a statement about like how we might think about science for the next generation. So we want them to be passionate about science, but I also want them to know how to do it well. So being able to approach a problem, think critically about how we might design an experiment to test different parts of it. If something fails, what do we go back to try to make the experiment better the second time around? And I've mentored, I think, more than 10 different undergraduate students, and I'm still in contact with almost all of them. Even the ones who did not go on to be scientists, they went into different career paths. I still like to stay in touch with them because I hope that they learned something while they worked with me.
I feel like two kind of intertwined topics really struck out to me when reading Lab Girl. One of them was Hope's relationship with her lab assistant, Bill, and the great team that they made. I really appreciated the fact that they made the scientific research to be a team effort. I've been fortunate to work with the same scientists for over 15 years. And I also think we approach the scientific research as a team effort. I really like that the scientist I work for, that he appreciates the experience and ideas that I bring to the research. He listens to my input and allows me to make decisions that impact the research. And I think that being allowed to do that has really made the work really satisfying and meaningful to me. So this, despite the fact that I've been in the field for you know, actually 25 years now. I think that if you have a scientist that you're working for, if they don't allow you to have any input in it, I could see where the work could get boring really fast. But if you're allowed to have input in what's going on, it makes it really exciting. The other topic that really stood out to me in this book was the topic of science and motherhood. So while I've worked at NCAUR, I have had 5 kids, and I really I was really upset when I read Hope's experience where she was pregnant and wanted to continue working and she was sent home. Like they told her, you have to go home. And that is not the experience that I had at all, fortunately. So for each one of my 5 pregnancies, I was able to work up until days before I had the children. And that at NCAUR, I felt like I was able to take the kind of maternity leave that I wanted. And as a mom of these 5 kids, that I have been able to maintain a decent work life balance. So I still can, the science, I think science can, the nature of it can allow you to have some flexibility where if you plan your experiments right, once again, that goes back to the concept that my scientists that I work with does give me some freedom to, in the experimental design. So I can help work with him, and we can design experiments where, if I need to go volunteer in my kids' classroom once a month, we just make sure that, nothing has to happen right at that exact moment. So I really have appreciated working for the USDA at NCAUR and with the scientists that I work with. So I really, after reading this book, I didn't want any young girl out there thinking that a career in science wasn't compatible with being a mother, or if you're not interested in being a mom, not being able to have a life outside of work, because you can be a scientist and have a life outside of science too.
Thank you. And a lot of you kind of answered this question in some ways, but to directly ask that question, what are some of the themes from the book that resonated most with you?
So for me, reading this book I really felt like it was like walking down memory lane. There was just so many things that I could relate to. It was almost like it was my life, except, very different, but many of the characters and the struggles and just so much of it. Themes that I could relate to and events. One of the things that Erica touched on that I could relate to well in the book was the author's kind of struggle, and you could see the process for her of learning how to develop a work-life balance. So that was something that I struggled with as well, especially when you're coming out of graduate school. You develop all sorts of bad habits, like working late into the night and, just crazy hours and crazy things that you do. So when you start working in a real job, you have to kind of learn to set up boundaries. And that took me a while. Luckily, when I had children, and now I have 2 kids, age 6 and 11. And so that's forced me to learn how to balance my life. And it sounds to me like the author as well had to learn how to balance out, work and your passion for science, and your sometimes you're doing things in the lab, and when things are going well, you don't want to leave, you want to stay. But when you have kids and other responsibilities, you have to learn to set up boundaries. And so while it is a struggle sometimes, I think, like Erica said, it's definitely possible, and I definitely would not want it any other way. I mean, I love my kids and my family so much, but I also, I would never have wanted to stop doing science because of that. So That's like, and the USDA has been really great in terms of flexibility. Like Erica said, you can set up things, you can use your leave. They're very flexible in terms of leave for kids' doctor's appointments, and we have a telework policy that really helps if you have to stay at home with a sick kid, things like that. So
there were actually a lot of things that resonated for me as well. Starting from the very beginning, I grew up with Scandinavian parents who also expected a lot and didn't talk a whole lot. So that kind of hooked me, and I was like, oh my gosh, that's my life. It was kind of great to hear that. There were other things that kind of did resonate as well. I actually had my children while I was in graduate school because I wasn't smart, but there was an incident in the lab where there was a hydrogen sulfide spill, and so I was told I can't be in the lab. I was actually excused, we'll say administratively excused, for 6 months while I was pregnant with my daughter. That was back in the day. I would like to say things have gotten better. The one thing she talks about is the good old boys club. And when I was an undergraduate, I had the opportunity to get involved in undergraduate research. I worked with a man named Dr. Bachman, and we did X-ray crystallography, which is really kind of a cool thing where you X-ray crystals and figure out what structures look like. It was a lot of fun, very exciting for me. And I had the opportunity to go to an American Chemical Society meeting because they took some students, and they had a poster session at night. In all fairness, at 20 years old, I could have passed for 12. I was very young looking, but we went to this poster session, and there was a man presenting some work on X-ray crystallography, which was what I had been studying. And so I went up and I asked him a question, and I said, "Sir, what about XYZ?" And he ignored me. And I thought, well, maybe he's just not hearing me. "Sir, I have a question. What about?" And he ignored me again. I asked a third time, and he still just looked over my head. And I went to a friend of mine who was male and said, "Chuck, you're not going to believe what happened. I have this question. I really want to know." And he looked at me. He's like, "Hey, I'll go ask." So my friend went with me, and Chuck asked the question. And the gentleman was like, "That's a great question. I've never heard such a question," and went on to explain. My friend Chuck had no idea what he was talking about. I got my answer, but I was pretty downhearted because I had this question and I was overlooked because I was a young girl. I went to complain then to my professor, and there were actually several other of their colleagues that were there, and they said, "Well, Kim, you just need to grow taller." I never grew taller. However, things have gotten a little bit better. Someone asked me not that long ago, is it still that way? And I can tell you that in my experience, particularly at the Ag Lab, I have never been looked down on my opinions or my science because of my gender. The people I have worked with have respected me because I've shown that I know what I'm talking about. So I think Hope does that as well. She finally sticks with it. Sometimes it's getting past the bump in the road, but you can definitely prove your worth.
So one of the things that we really see are the many challenges that perhaps we've all seen, and you know, that Hope Jahren describes also. And yet throughout all of that, there is that persistence, and that thing that we just keep coming back to, doing what we love to do. So what are some of the rewards that we have in our careers?
All right. So for me personally, when I think of some of the rewards of being a scientist, I think of two things. One is my current position at the USDA, and two is how I've worked under some really great scientists who have also doubled as really great mentors. And for me, these two rewards go hand in hand, so I really can't mention one without bringing up the other. So my first real interaction with scientists, I would say, started in grad school. When I was doing my master's at ISU, I was fortunate enough to have been advised by two scientists with two different backgrounds. For example, one of my advisors was a behavior ecologist who studies adaptations that enhance an individual's mating success. And the other advisor was an evolutionary ecologist who had a broad focus in ecological immunology. And then at the USDA too, I realized that I have another great mentor in my life, which is the scientist that I currently work for and who I previously mentioned is Dr. Jose Luis Ramirez. And again, he specializes in the biological control of mosquitoes and vector biology. And so I'm sure you can imagine that from working with all these scientists with different backgrounds that I've just gained a wealth of knowledge, and I have. And these could be anything from like learning a ton of biological concepts or learning about different research methods or just gaining countless skills. And this is across multiple disciplines. So learning all these has not only been really impactful for me as a scientist, but it's been really important for my current job position. And that's because being a lab tech at the USDA is really rewarding for a number of reasons. The one that I find most rewarding is that techs are given the opportunity to wear a lot of hats on a daily basis. And that's so much as saying that we have a lot of scientific roles that we carry out. For example, me being in the lab on any given day, I can be like anything from a microbiologist to a molecular biologist, and I'm almost always a lab manager, but that's just to name a few. There's a lot more that everyone fulfills. But with these different roles come different responsibilities, and I'm really fortunate that I've had really great mentors in science, because without them, I don't think I'd be able to wear all these hats all at the same time, right? And then, you know, the last thing I'd like to mention is that being a lab tech for a mosquito control lab is like especially rewarding, because you realize that a lot of the science that you're doing has the potential to reach people in their lives, like on national and global scales. And that's because mosquitoes, they roughly kill like 1 million people a year. And, you know, there's labs like us, and there's so many other labs that aim to prevent the transmission of deadly vector diseases. And this alone makes being a lab tech at the USDA like one of the most rewarding experiences yet. But if it weren't for the mentors that I've had along the way, I wouldn't have been doing such important work. And so, yeah, I'm just really great to share that with everybody. And yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, so I'm going to take on this question as well. And I think a lot of what I'm going to say will echo what Kylie says. This is going to be my experience. So for me, the biggest reward of being a scientist, especially with the USDA, is that every day I come to work and I feel like the work that I'm doing matters and is helpful to folks both now, but also in future generations to follow. Because globally, we're tasked with feeding and clothing a lot of people in the most efficient environment and environmentally sustainable ways as possible. And this critical demand is only increasing. And so my work and the work that of those alongside me, many of which you have met today, attempts to solve or to tackle these challenges with both tried and true conventional research methods, but increasingly in really innovative and creative ways. And I'm extremely proud to be involved with the Agricultural Research Services mission. But beyond the importance of the work that I do, I also find a lot of joy in my science. And I think what I do is actually really fun. I love that I get to make discoveries, even those that are really small to some, at work every day. And that's not to say that it's not often tedious and frustrating, especially when things don't quite work out. But as a whole, I have a great time when I'm in the lab, and that's absolutely made better by the wonderful people that I get to work with, including some tremendous mentors that I've had along the way that are across disciplines and research interests. So I'm not sure if there are many other professions where you get to meet and collaborate on specific issues with so many people from all over the world, tackling different types of questions. And so I just think it's a blast. That's the biggest reward, I think.
Thank you all. And for me also, that is very much the rewarding, the big picture, the impact, the potential that we have to make an impact. And despite the failures, then that leads to much more, you know, when you do have the success, the perception of it is just so much greater. If you've stumbled 3 times, when you can get up and walk, it's a good thing. And one of my mentors had told me, you know, in science, we develop a hypothesis. So we develop we guess what's going to happen, and then we design an experiment to test that hypothesis. And well, quite frequently, my hypotheses would fail. But when the hypothesis failed, my mentor told me, you have a discovery. You don't have a failure. When that means that you read the literature, but the experiment showed you that it's something else than what you initially anticipated. So you have a discovery. So it depends on how you look at it. So with that, I'd like to open, please ask questions in the chat and open the floor for questions from the audience.
Thanks everyone for all your wonderful insights. While people are thinking of questions, we did have someone who emailed me a question earlier today. And they would like to know more about who inspired you to pursue scientific careers. So I know we heard from a couple of you about that, but would anyone else like to chime in about your inspiration to pursue science?
I think a big one for me was actually my mom. So when I was a kid, maybe a little bit like Hope Jahren. So neither one of my parents were scientists, as our 2 lovely panelists answered similarly earlier. But I did have a mother who liked to take long walks on the beach and point out seashells and birds. And I was always encouraged to ask questions. And so I think those 2 things combined, being really encouraged as a child to ask questions, no matter how big they are, and no matter if the adult in the room can't answer the question, that's 100% okay. And then 2, to sort of to look around you and be curious and wonder, why do things happen the way that they happen? That's really sort of what got me going as a kid, and sort of encouraged me to really follow the passion of science in high school and in college, and figure out exactly what part of science I actually wanted to do.
I'll chime in if there's no other questions. I was not really interested in science until I got into a high school physics class. So I was probably a junior or a senior. So shout out to my physics teacher and all of the science teachers out there, because you guys are usually the first inspiration for a lot of people to get into science, and keep doing what you're doing, because you're all doing a great job.
Well, my dad was an engineer, so he kind of inspired me to go into science, but more than that, he encouraged me to question. So why did that happen? My children, on the other hand, were also raised sort of like Hope was. I brought them into the lab with me when they were a little bit bigger in grade school and things like that. And we had science fun night at our house because their mom was a dork and I thought it would be fun. So when we dissected the fetal pig at school, I brought one home and the whole neighborhood came over to check out this fetal pig because, well, I mean, it's cool, right? So at this point, my son is getting his degree in biology, and my daughter is finishing her PhD in chemistry. So the little kind of fun, cool, neat stuff can make a difference, I think, to kids. Whether you're a scientist or not, just saying, hey, why? And then exploring with them.
It makes such a difference when you're in school and a teacher or someone, you know, points out that you're good at something, or, you know, even for me, it was in fact an English teacher who pointed out to me that a lot of my essays included plants and included giving plants personality. And I didn't even realize that I was doing it until she pointed it out to me. So.
Anyone else want to jump in on that one? Well, in Lab Girl, Hope Jahren describes some, shall we call them laboratory adventures, some involving vials of shattering glass, other near disasters that in retrospect seem sobering as well as a bit humorous, but I was wondering if anyone would be interested or at liberty to share any of your lab adventures.
None of that happens at the USDA. We're all super safe. No.
I'll add something from my first chemistry class in college. There's something called a breakage fee, and things in first year chemistry are relatively inexpensive, and I had like a $50 breakage fee. So I think I broke a record for that. And then the next year you start working with much more expensive glassware, and I became much more careful.
I'll tell a funny story since it's not safety related. But so I work in an entomology lab, and I work with, I have Madagascar hissing cockroaches in my lab because I do like to go to classrooms and talk to kids about insects. So I do not do research on Madagascar hissing cockroaches, but I do have them. As a matter of fact, they're in this home office with me right now because I brought them home to take care of during the pandemic, which my kids really like. But, and I'm totally going to blame it on an undergraduate student because I'm pretty sure that's who is to blame. One of our undergraduate students left the lid off the Madagascar hissing cockroach container, and a few of them escaped. So another thing I will point out to those people who do work at NCAUR, they cannot survive on their own. They're rainforest creatures. They can't find food. They can't breed. Like they're not running around NCAUR right now. But for a while we were finding them in very unusual places. So one afternoon I was reaching into a box to get some lids out of this box, and I felt something like crawling up my hand. And despite the fact that I work with insects every day, I screamed, and everybody in the room thought it was the most hysterical thing ever. And until like 2 days later, another one dropped from a doorway in front of a male scientist in our lab, and he let out, a noise also. So it was a very funny experience, I think, in our laboratory. And definitely, I don't even know how many years ago that was, but I definitely we have not forgotten it.
We do have a question. Oops, sorry, go ahead, Jill, and then we can go to the next one.
Well, I was just going to say I have one experience that was not quite as funny. I was making methanolic ammonia. So what you have to do is you have to blow ammonia into methanol until it's basically saturated. So your methanol is in a hood, like a fume hood, which is like an enclosed space where the solvents you can't smell them or inhale them. And my ammonia tank was outside of that. And I turned off the ammonia tank when I was finished, but I wasn't, I wasn't paying attention, and I leaned into this enclosed hood space, and there was ammonia throughout the atmosphere of the hood, and I could feel it like it was slamming me in my brain. And I luckily didn't pass out or fall on the floor because there was nobody in the lab at the time, but it was really a learning experience for me that you really sometimes you have to really pay attention to what you're doing. But that was not at the USDA. That was when I was a postdoc. So yes, ever since I've worked at the USDA, I've been very safe. Haven't broken anything.
All right, we do have a question from the audience. For those working with mosquitoes, how are the prospects going to get rid of malaria carrying mosquitoes? And how do you avoid killing other insects in the process?
Hi. Those are really great questions, and I wish I had answers for both, at least detailed answers. But malaria is a huge public health concern, but it isn't something that our lab addresses, although it's something that we hope to use like insect pathogens to maybe apply to that mosquito species, because that's Anopheles, and we work with Aedes primarily in the lab. What we do is that we take different insect pathogens, kind of like bacteria and fungi, and we just try to choose very specific strains that will target these mosquito species that we're working on, that will just only take out these mosquito populations and not other insects. Because right now we see a lot of chemical pesticides that do that. They are like killing off mosquitoes, but they also have detrimental effects to other insects, like really beneficial insects like bumblebees and stuff like that. So I think we would hopefully improve upon that with using the micro-based biopesticide approach with just insect pathogens to get away from harming other insects. So I hope that answers your question. To touch back on the first question about the malaria spreading mosquitoes, I did just take a global vector control course, and I did learn that they're using mostly bed nets over there to try to prevent malaria from spreading. And that's very specific to mosquitoes because they get in and they try to bite you at night and stuff like that. Again, really good questions, and I hope to maybe address them in the future, but I don't have a specific answer at the moment.
Thanks, Kylie. Yeah, it seems like in a lot of your research, all of you panelists, that's probably a balance that a lot of you have to work with, is when you're looking to control certain pest populations, how to target them and not have collateral damage environmentally or on other species. So does anyone else want to jump in with some of what you're dealing with in that realm and how you try and mitigate those?
I wouldn't mind jumping in real quick just to say, a lot of our research on insect pathology, which is the study of diseases in insects or and things like that, have been targeted to kill pests, insect pests. And some of my research is sort of looking at studying the diseases of these insects, not to kill them, but to keep them alive. So if you actually want to rear and farm a bunch of insects, it's good to get a handle on the diseases that may cause mass die-offs. And so, yeah, it's been an interesting approach, because usually it's been like, how do we kill these insects? And it's like, well, what if we don't want to kill them, but we want to do the opposite and want to keep them alive and have them grow nice and big and healthy? So that's what I'll add there.
Another approach that we take is to trying to enhance the plant's natural defense system so that we don't have to apply as much chemical pesticide, so that the plant by itself is producing these, a lot of, Jill mentioned antioxidants as well. Some of those antioxidants that the plants naturally produce inhibit toxin production formed by fungi that are infecting the plants. So.
All right, do we have any other questions from the audience? We have one here. What message do you have to those who want to pursue a scientific career?
It is very rewarding, and choose a topic that you are passionate about, because yes, there are some challenges, but if you're absolutely passionate about what you're doing, you won't even realize the time has gone by. You'll be there at 12 o'clock at night and the experiment won't be done and you will be having fun. So, anybody else?
I'll echo what was said earlier. I think find a mentor. I think mentorship in science is super important.
And along those lines, your mentor doesn't necessarily have to be your boss. A mentor can be anybody that you would like to go to and ask questions about, maybe not necessarily about how to do a specific project you're working on, but their thoughts about science in general. If you are facing some of those pressures, maybe sort of like the men's club, or if you're feeling otherwise at a disadvantage for some reason about yourself, it's nice to be able to have other people besides necessarily the person that is your boss to be able to go talk to. And so mentoring can really come in a very, anybody can be a mentor, basically. So find those mentors wherever you go, and you'll be able to sort of move past any of the hurdles that come up.
And you can look for them at the USDA. The Ag Lab is welcome to anybody who's interested in. Right now, it's a little bit challenging because of COVID. We're not having as many visitors, but send me an email and let me know what you're interested in, and we'll pass that along to the center director. Actually, pass it to Kim Ascherl. She knows everybody in the entire facility, so let us know if you're interested. There are some exceptional mentors at NCAUR.
There are also some other great structured mentorship programs for young people. If you go to societies like ASPB, the American Society of Plant Biologists, they have a mentorship platform where you can sign up to mentor or sign up to be a mentee. And you can look through people's, quote unquote, resumes, a little blurb about themselves, find someone that you'd like to chat with. So if you're struggling to find someone, that is another way that you can go find a mentor that's not necessarily a boss.
I think the one thing I would like to add to that is stick with it, because if you're in class, and especially if you're in high school or junior high, you may be thinking science is kind of boring. Science can be really, really exciting. And it's a little bit different in the lab than it is in class, because lab experiments in college and in high school are designed to work. I think most of us will tell you science in the lab doesn't always work. And I want to end with a quote from actually Erica's boss, who I was talking to after something went wrong. And he looked at me and he's like, Kim, most innovation and most good science doesn't come with eureka. It follows the words, huh, that's weird.
I see Martha's shared.
That's the website of NCAUR, the USDA here. So you're welcome to, on that is all the contact information at that website.
Everyone. And I'm also going to go ahead and drop in a link for the library website too. This is where you can find out all about more NEA Big Read programs that we have coming up. Does anyone else have a question? Burning question, your last chance to ask. I'm gonna turn it over one more time to our panelists. Does anyone else have anything final to say tonight?
I think to reiterate what Susan said earlier, keep reading books too through the library, and they can be inspiring also if you don't have somebody in person, maybe that could be a mentor. So, thank you so much for letting us be part of this and for your interest.
Well, thank you so much to you, to our panelists, to everyone who tuned in tonight. Well, that wraps it up for tonight. Take care and good night, everyone.
Hi, thanks everybody.